writing or in print, in any form of art or through any other media of his or her choice. Okay, the her I put in for the benefit of the special rapporteur. Actually, the convention says only his right, of his choice. So this is the definition given to this right internationally. There's other conventions that speaks to this right, especially the Convention on the Right of the Child, where this right is extended specifically to children, and in the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities, where it also talks about disabled persons. And this is another part. We must also remember that information should be in such a format that the person receiving it must understand it. So if it talks about disabilities, it must cater for the mentally handicapped, it must cater for the sight handicapped, even for the people who can't hear. So this is a guidance towards the format this information must be in. Then all the African instruments, but that was discussed by Henry earlier this morning, so I'm not going to dwell on them. This fundamental right is further guaranteed in other international documents and national constitution. Freedom of information, or the right to access to information, is defined in general as the universal right to access information held by public bodies. In terms of these instruments, it is the touchstone of all freedoms, as I explained earlier, as it embodies the right to know, to make free choices, and to live an autonomous life. Public bodies do not hold information for themselves. This is something important. Why do public bodies have information? They are custodians. And a custodian's duty is to provide it when and where it's needed. In the Namibian context, and this is I think where Yvonne comes in a bit more, we have a long history of recognizing this right. However, freedom of speech and expression under Article 21 of the Namibian Constitution specifically includes freedom of the press and media, but excludes freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas. The formulation of our Constitution does not include, the wording does not include this right. Although freedom of information has an extension of freedom of speech, because those things go together, last mentioned right does not confer a right of access to information per se, and does not compel public authority to disclose information against their will. While the Namibian Constitution, unlike the South African Constitution, does not expressly provide for a right to access to information, let us examine what other provisions in the Constitution may give expression to the right of access to information. In Article 95, that is our article dealing with state policy, the state must actively promote and maintain the welfare of its people by adopting policies to ensure that every citizen has a right to fair and reasonable access to public facilities and services in accordance with law, encourage the mass of the population through education and other activities and through their organizations to influence government policy by debating its decisions. And this is what we're doing here today. We're trying to encourage government to speed up their very slow process. Under the above constitutional provisions and under international treaty obligations. Now, where this comes into our law is in terms of Section 144 of our Constitution. We recognize that international law becomes binding on Namibian government and Namibia if it was ratified and acceded to by the country. So these obligations, although we don't have the right specifically in our chapter on our Bill of Rights, these obligations became part of our law through our international instruments that we acceded to. Namibia is compelled to enact national legislation to give effect to the right of access to information. I believe government is aware, and we heard that this morning, that such an exercise will enhance the free flow of information to citizens in order to influence government policies by debating its decisions, which will eventually lead to greater public transparency and accountability, as well as good governance and strengthening democracy. The biggest reason, in my opinion, why we're talking about access to information, although it's information that touch on the self also, but as a group, is the fact that we want to achieve more accountability. Now, accountability, in my opinion, is one of the cornerstones of good governance. And you can only ask questions if you have the information. What is important is that in terms of these things, it talks about public policy and government's obligation. But it's also, I feel, a human right to have access to your own information held in private bodies, or information that touch on you. And that should be an extension of your right to identity, and then your right to seek information. So what I want to distinguish between is the right as a group to ask questions from government to inform, keep people informed or to provide information, and where you touch on yourself as a person, even to oblige private bodies to depart with that information. While knowing that, why is government reluctant to enact national legislation to give effect to this right? I do not have all the answers. However, experience has taught that by simply passing laws does not guarantee that they will be implemented or contribute in themselves to accountability. And I want to pause here and give my colleague from the Auditor General to strengthen or to underline his comment that he made. It is true that we have, I think, education. You work in education, have more than 200 policies. I think they are the ministry in Namibia with the most efficient policy development department, or developing department. But it's not to say those policies are enforced. I mean, we stand at this stage where there was a national conference on education last year, where it actually came out that some of these policies, most of them, is not enhancing anything in education. So they're actually worthless because they're not implemented. The real work in regard to freedom of information laws begins with the implementation. Implementation relies on a multitude of factors, namely availability of resources, the capacity of public officials to implement procedures, the capacity of citizens to benefit from law, additional change of public officials, attitudinal change of public officials, and this is one of the major concerns, is that people can actually provide you with information. They sit in a government office, they have the information, they simply do not want to. So that is one of the biggest challenges I think that we have even today, without a law. I believe that we should first create an environment conducive for implementation of a freedom of information law. We should first do the groundwork and put mechanisms in place to guarantee the implementation of that law. And again, Mr. Elliott from Education, or a consultant, that is one of our biggest challenges. If we pass this law, if we get it this far, I spoke to some of my colleagues in the Ministry of Justice at the legislative drafters. And in 12 years, after the cabinet decision, they have not received a request to formulate such a law. So it's still going to take some time for this law to be, in fact, formulated and passed in Namibia. However, it does not give us time to lay around. We can start already with what we have to start improving access to information. We should prepare the public administration for the execution of the law on data protection, electronic transactions and communications, protection of personal information, and indeed access to information. If you look today, I had the nasty experience of standing in a queue yesterday at NATIS to renew my motor vehicle license. It took me 1.5 hours to renew a license that just as easily could have been paid for and renewed electronically. So it took me away because they only open from 8 to 4:30. So it took me away from my office. It was the second last day that I could renew this license. Today is actually the last day, without facing a penalty. So for 1.5 hours, I did not sit in my office, I did not work. I contributed nothing to the economy of Namibia. And this is not only unique to NATIS. You see it every day. If you go to Home Affairs, if you go to the Ministry of Health, if you want services at a clinic, I think that would be a bit difficult to provide electronically. But all over Namibia, we're waiting in queues. And that is as easy as putting a system in place to do it electronically. Upgrade and improve public administration's ability to maintain its record-keeping and documentation systems. Now, we heard they're busy with the system, Office of the Prime Minister, together with the archive people, they must implement this. They're busy implementing it, and one of the pilot ministries, I must confess, was the Ministry of Home Affairs. I do not know how successful they were, but those are things that hampers the process. The Ministry of Home Affairs being an example that you do not have, as a citizen of this country, you do not have one file. There is no electronic file where your birth is registered, the fact that you got married, the fact that you got divorced 3 times, the fact that you have children. None of those things are linked. And I think the government is working, the Ministry of Home Affairs, I think if you talk to the minister today, she will recognize that they're in the process, they realize this, they must at least bring these things together. But I think we sit in a stage where we still live 30 years ago, where nothing was electronic. And we simply, time is catching up on us. And it's one of the biggest places where you see it is with regard to access to information. We should implement a broader e-governance system which will enable electronic interaction between government and citizens and businesses. Again, we do this. You can currently electronically pay your VAT, and government pays its suppliers electronically. But that system also has limitations, because not all suppliers can be loaded on that system. But at least they are moving somewhere with regard to that. Improve the ICT literacy levels of government staff members to prepare them for the demands of the information society. Before I worked for the Office of the Ombudsman, I was privy to the development of the NAMSIS, to be part of the development team of the NAMSIS court process, court information, NAMSIS, Namibian Court Information System. And our biggest hindrance with implementing this system was the fact that people over the age of 40 is not computer literate. They simply can't type. They do not use a computer. They're still scared of it. And until we realize that we will need to even look at our older members of society to bring them also on board. With regard to electronics, this cannot happen in government. Because if you can't work the computer, you can't get the information. Train and encourage officials to adopt a greater culture of openness. Unfortunately, I must share this with you. I worked previously in the Office of the Prosecutor General. And when you phone from the Prosecutor General's office and you say, your advocate so-and-so, and you want this information, they gave it to you. They never questioned you. I'm still the same person. I'm working now for the Office of the Ombudsman. So when you phone today, as the Office of the Ombudsman, who must have access to information, when you request it, more than once you will get the response, I can't talk to you, you must talk to my boss. And when you talk to the boss, they will tell you you must write a letter and ask it formally. And I mean, we are the watchdog institution for public service, but we also don't get the information that we seek. So it's again this thing of, let me rather not tell anybody anything that I can't be quoted, and nobody can say something is wrong. Train information officers to assist on a request of information. Transfer of requests, protection of information, how to deal with missing records or records which do not exist. Again, from the office experience, people simply do not know how to deal with missing records. You see it on a daily basis with regards to appeals that should be forwarded to the High Court for prosecution. Those records get lost, and then nobody knows how to recreate that record. And there's actually, in case law and in the court rules, clear regulations or steps that you must take, but nobody knows how to do that. Readily provide information on request. Publish information, important information of significant public interest, even in the absence of a request. Amend secrecy laws to comply with freedom of information principles. We spoke about that earlier. Secondly, to compel public authorities to compile and publish information manuals. We also don't know that. I don't know whether one of you ever had the distinct pleasure of trying to find out from Home Affairs how to apply for a work permit. The information is available on the website, but if you go to the counter, you must stand in a queue at the counter where you ask for a form. When you get the form, you must go to the counter that tells you what you need. So again, this whole thing of, it's there, it's on their website. Why can't we at the counter depart with all the information that we know? Public authorities, I must say here, also includes semi-government and other public governing bodies. And we spoke during break time, Eben and myself, how difficult it is to get information that you are entitled to because you're actually a contributor to the budget of that organization, like NAMFISA and ECB. Have any of you tried to get hold of their structure and the salary attached to the position on that structure? And you pay for it. Every piece of insurance that you have, you pay for NAMFISA. You contribute to their coffers. So why can't you ask? The power and responsibilities of the officials, as well as decision-making procedures. This is good administrative law. We don't need a law of access to information. We have a common understanding of administrative law, the principles that can be addressed here. Description of the services it provides for the public and how to gain access to those services. A brief description of the complaint hearing mechanism available to the public and the public body's response to frequently asked questions. A description of the type of records under its possession. a brief description of the contents of its records, and a detailed explanation of the procedures to be followed by persons who wish to access this information. A description of its laws, regulations, directives, policies, guidelines, and manuals, which govern the operation and the activities of its various organs, along with its description of any amendments or repeal of such provisions. Example here is the city of Windhoek. Do you have access, as a member of the public, to find out what is the regulations applicable in the city of Windhoek? I bet you not. You will have to go to a law library and have a bit of knowledge of how to look for repealed acts and regulations and policies. And yeah, it's if you have the time and the money to do this, well, good for you. Employ a lawyer. One of the people making money out of this chaos, employ a lawyer to give you an opinion on it, because it's difficult. You do not know what is the noise regulations in the city of Windhoek and how they measure it and how you can complain about your neighbor making a noise. It's not simply available. It should also publish its directives, regulation, guidelines, and other documents which govern the activities of the employees of the organization, the name and address of the information officer, and such information as may be prescribed. Nobody can deny the fact that national legislation of the right of access to information is long overdue. But to legislate just for the sake of legislation, without a guarantee of implementation, would not give our citizens access to vital information. The purpose of such legislation should be to get rid of the secretive and unresponsive culture in public as well as private bodies, and to promote a culture of transparency and accountability. There are a number of acts gathering dust on the shelves which cannot be implemented for various reasons. The same fate should not befall an act which will give effect to the citizens' right to know. You will agree with me that an uninformed nation is an uneducated nation. That is not what we want for ourselves. I thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. You saved yourself because I was about to say, you need to round up. People speak, but luckily I have a loud voice because I can't, what am I supposed to do here? Failing me. Okay, what I think we should do, I don't know how the other sessions will run, but as it is with all things I do, I always do it a bit different, is that I will not have the two other panelists directly respond. I think that was not the intention. You know, if you have your own presentations, I'm happy to give you 3 to 5 minutes to run down your presentation, because I think the important thing is to have public debate and so that people participate. So let's get the other two. Maybe I can start with Nata from NID to make your input. Are you ready? Okay.
I won't be long. For me, thank you, Eileen, for the presentation. It was really insightful. I just jot down some food for thought, as I call it, and also from everything that I saw this morning, or from what I heard this morning. I once saw this statement of an Italian political scientist who said, democracy can only exist when the basic laws and mechanisms are understandable by the average citizen. So for me, it's more a matter of, I think we're more here to ask questions. Is the information available, understandable by the citizen, as you already said? Is the average citizen involved in the democratic process? Does the average citizen has an interest to get all this information, to know where to get the information? And when you look at Namibia, we have a high offer, or yes, the legislations is there, the offers, everything, the framework is there for democracy and everything, but now how much do citizens really want to work with it, and how much do they want to make it useful for them? Because I think what we always forget as citizens is the power that we have. And I'm glad that this conference is taking place and really setting a mark, or making a statement to say we really are demanding this. But I hope basically we're here to ask more questions about the whole process and to really get the information also out there, that we are not the only ones discussing it in an enclosed circuit as it happens often in Namibia, that you have the information but it's only available to a few chosen ones, and we are the few chosen ones here today. I'm wondering where we're going from here.
You know, when you talk about the chosen ones, it has a biblical connection, so I hope that it doesn't mean only you go to heaven. Let's hear from Mary Jane Ncube, is it? From Transparency International in Zimbabwe. I know you're impressed with the way I said Ncube.
Very impressed. I'll be slightly longer, because I thought it would be good to give the perspective of Transparency International, which I think is going to be beneficial for access to information activists, as well as for Namibia's efforts to improve its governance. I think it's interesting that Eileen speaks from the position of someone who's in the system, and we are outside of the system, constantly knocking on doors in government looking for information, and we face the same problems that she's facing. So now I won't feel so bad, because I know the people on the inside are going through what we're also going through. Access to information for us as Transparency International is more than just exposing corruption, as it's been popularized, that it is a tool to expose corruption, to bring those found guilty to book. We see it in broader terms as also a tool for prevention and public education. And information for prevention should be information that goes far enough to give academics, researchers, the courts, everybody who's a stakeholder, an idea of what's happening in a country, so that they can take part in the democratic processes or in the governance process. And information that's for public education is to teach the public how to demand accountability. I think we always assume that the public, when they get information, will know what to do. But from our experience working on the ground with communities, we find that frustration, that we work so hard building up information, even going as far lately to breaking it down to local languages, but we haven't been a people that is accustomed to standing up, demanding accountability, demanding answerability from our leaders. So this is a taught behavior. But equally, governments, I think it's been said here a number of times, especially by the gentleman who spoke about the education, information, and so forth. Governments also don't know how to provide information. They don't know how to package it. They don't know how to disseminate the information. This is also something that has to be taught. Why the data is sitting there raw in government offices is because once it's been produced, no one has ever really thought that there is an obligation of sharing this information with the public, and the public hasn't reciprocated. Access to information for Transparency International is a two-way street. The public has to know how to demand, but the government has to know how to provide it. So there is an obligation on the part of the citizens, a social responsibility obligation to demand that information, to take part, to take an interest in breaking down the information, in digesting it and using it to further democratic rights, to further governance. There's also a public accountability duty on the part of the state to make sure that public officials, as has been stated this morning, know that they have a duty